I never intended to become the villain in my own story. No one dreams of growing up to break the heart of someone they once promised to cherish. Yet here I am, in this empty apartment, staring at bare walls and wondering how everything collapsed so spectacularly. A numbness has settled over me since Maya discovered the truth. This numbness is the only thing shielding me from the full devastation of the storm I created. 3 years ago, we were happy, or at least I thought we were. Maya and I, the perfect couple in everyone's eyes. We had our cozy home, stable careers, and plans that stretched into a promising future. Then Maya's work began demanding more of her time. Our evening conversations transformed into silent scrolling on separate devices. Date nights evaporated. The I love yous became rare and mechanical. I told myself I was being emotionally abandoned, that my growing unhappiness was justified, that anyone in my position would feel the same crushing loneliness I did. Her constant exhaustion became my excuse. Her canceled plans became my permission. Her emotional distance became my justification. Looking back now, I see how I crafted this narrative so carefully. I wasn't cheating, I was simply finding what I deserved, what I needed, what was missing. The story I told myself was elaborate and increasingly convincing. Maya's promotion last year meant longer hours, more stress, and less energy for us. I celebrated with her publicly, the supportive partner applauding her success. Privately, I tallied every missed dinner, every postponed weekend plan, every night she fell asleep before we could talk. I remember the exact moment I decided our marriage wasn't fulfilling me anymore. We were at a friend's anniversary party. Maya spent the entire evening networking with colleagues who happened to be there, while I stood alone by the bar, watching other couples laugh and dance together. The contrast was stark and painful. I felt invisible in my own relationship. That night, driving home in silence, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront Maya. I wouldn't suggest counseling. I wouldn't make any honest attempt to repair what was breaking. Instead, I would seek elsewhere what I convinced myself she was no longer providing. It was easier to cast her as the neglectful partner than to acknowledge my own unwillingness to communicate my needs. Easier to justify betrayal than to face the hard work of vulnerability. Easier to find external validation than to examine why I suddenly needed it so desperately. The first time with Olivia was supposed to be just coffee. A harmless conversation with a colleague who actually listened, who laughed at my jokes, who made me feel seen again. "You seem like you need someone to talk to," she'd said, those understanding eyes drawing me in. Coffee became lunch, lunch became drinks, drinks became hushed conversations in her car, and then, inevitably, her apartment. The thrill was intoxicating. The secrecy added an electric charge to every moment. I found myself inventing work emergencies, fabricating late meetings, creating an elaborate architecture of lies to support my double life. I became meticulous about deleting texts, using private browsing, keeping a separate credit card for expenses Maya would never see. I created an entire system designed to protect my deception. And with each layer of lies, I convinced myself I deserved this happiness, that Maya's emotional absence had forced me into this, that I was really the victim here. The first time I lied directly to Maya's face about where I'd been, I expected to feel crushing guilt. Instead, I felt a disturbing rush of power. The ease with which she believed me, just working late, got caught up in a project, felt like confirmation that she wasn't paying enough attention. Her trust became another justification. If she really cared, wouldn't she notice the changes in me? With Olivia, I created a different version of myself. Not the frustrated husband, not the overlooked partner. With her, I was attentive, passionate, emotionally available, all the things I claimed Maya wasn't getting from me. The irony was lost on me then. I was capable of being everything I accused Maya of not being, just not with her. Olivia knew I was married, of course. I'd crafted the perfect story there too, a wife who didn't understand me, a loveless marriage we were both just enduring, plans to leave that were complicated by finances and timing. She believed me because she wanted to, just as I believed my own justifications. The compartmentalization became second nature. I grew skilled at the quick switch between personas, devoted husband when necessary, passionate lover when possible. The mental gymnastics required to maintain these separate selves should have been exhausting. Instead, they became a challenge I perversely enjoyed mastering. The affair intensified over months. I grew bolder, careless, started taking unnecessary risks. I left Olivia's earring in my car, used our joint account for a hotel once when I thought Maya wouldn't notice, called Maya by the wrong name once, quickly covering it with a cough. Each near miss should have been a warning. Instead, they became a perverse thrill, evidence of how skillfully I was managing this precarious balance. I started spending more time at the gym, bought new clothes, changed my cologne. When Maya noticed, I told her I was finally taking care of myself. In reality, I was molding myself into someone else's desire. The elaborate framework of lies became my full-time job. The constant vigilance, the memory tests to ensure my stories aligned, the growing distance between who I was and who I pretended to be. Some nights lying next to Maya while texting Olivia, I'd feel a momentary pang of guilt, but I'd quickly bury it under my carefully constructed justifications. This wasn't really cheating, this was survival. There were moments that should have been wake-up calls. Once Maya found a receipt from a restaurant I'd claimed never to have visited. I invented a business lunch so convincingly that she apologized for questioning me. Another time, a friend mentioned seeing me downtown when I told Maya I was out of town for work. I dismissed it as confusion, suggesting our friend had seen someone who looked like me. The friend backed down, unwilling to cause trouble. These moments where my lies were almost exposed should have terrified me. Instead, each successful deception reinforced my growing sense of invulnerability. I wasn't just getting away with the affair, I was excelling at it. The close calls became anecdotes I shared with Olivia, both of us laughing at how narrowly we'd avoided discovery. The deeper I sank into this double life, the more I rewrote the narrative of my marriage. Every memory underwent revision. Happy moments were minimized, conflicts were magnified. I convinced myself that Maya and I had been unhappy for years, not months, that our connection had been superficial from the start, that we had married too young, wanted different things, were fundamentally incompatible. None of it was true, but I needed it to be. The bigger the perceived problems in my marriage, the more justified my betrayal seemed. I began dropping hints to our mutual friends about my unhappiness. Nothing specific, nothing that could be traced back as preparation for infidelity, just enough to lay groundwork for when everything inevitably exploded. Marriage is harder than I expected. We're going through a rough patch. We want different things these days. I was preparing my audience to see me as sympathetic when the truth emerged, setting the stage for my eventual defense. 6 months in, Olivia started pressing for more. When would I leave Maya? What was our timeline? She wanted certainty, commitment, public acknowledgement, all reasonable requests that still triggered panic in me. The affair had never been about leaving my marriage. It had been about supplementing it, about having my needs met without the messy work of addressing the real issues with Maya, about enjoying the benefits of both relationships while bearing the full cost of neither. But to keep Olivia, I needed to make promises, and so I did, specific plans with arbitrary deadlines. After the holidays, once this big project at work is done, when we figure out the house situation, always specific enough to sound sincere, always vague enough to allow further postponement. I remember the exact date I promised Olivia I would tell Maya everything, May 15th, a random Friday I selected because it seemed far enough away to delay the inevitable, close enough to maintain Olivia's patience. I had no intention of following through, but the promise bought me time. More deception, more betrayal, more self-delusion. With that artificial deadline looming, I became increasingly reckless. The careful compartmentalization began to crack. I stopped being as vigilant about covering my tracks. Maybe subconsciously I wanted to be caught, to have the decision forced upon me. Or maybe I just grew overconfident, believing my own myth of invulnerability. The exposure came from where I least expected it. Not from my carelessness with technology, not from being spotted around town, not even from Olivia growing impatient with being the other woman. It was a simple birthday card that Olivia had given me, tucked into a book I was reading. I'd forgotten about it completely when I lent the book to Maya. I was in the kitchen when I heard her voice, eerily calm. "Who's Olivia?" The card was in her hand, 3 paragraphs of intimate details, inside jokes, and explicit references to our time together. There was no possible explanation, no conceivable lie that could explain it away. "And why does she think you're going to leave me for her next month?" My mind raced for a plausible story, but the evidence was damning. The calm in Maya's voice was more terrifying than any anger. "How long?" she asked. When I hesitated, she simply nodded, as if my silence confirmed something she'd suspected all along. "Get out." I started to protest, to explain, to somehow frame myself as the victim again, but the look in her eyes stopped me cold. It wasn't just hurt, it was clarity. She saw me completely for the first time in years, saw through every justification and lie I'd wrapped around myself. The moment stands crystallized in my memory. The afternoon light through our kitchen window. The way she held the card with just her fingertips as if it was contaminated. The absolute stillness of her body except for a slight tremor in her left hand. The way her voice never raised, never broke, but flattened into something I'd never heard before. I tried one last desperate approach, minimization. "It didn't mean anything," I said, the most cliched and cruel defense possible. Maya didn't respond with words. She simply placed the card on the counter, walked to our bedroom, and locked the door. When she emerged 20 minutes later, she had a small suitcase, not for her but for me. She'd packed just enough of my things to get me through a few days. The message was clear, figuring out the rest was my problem now. As she handed me the suitcase, I saw she'd already removed her wedding ring. The indentation on her finger was still visible, a physical representation of how quickly everything had changed. "I've already called a lawyer," she said, "and my parents and Lauren and David, our closest friends. Don't try to control the narrative, everyone will know exactly what happened and why." I realized then that Maya had always been 10 steps ahead of me. While I'd been strategizing my affair, she'd been efficient and decisive in responding to its discovery. There would be no manipulating this situation, no casting myself as the victim, no sympathy from our shared circles. I stood on our front porch with that pathetic suitcase, watching her close the door on 8 years of marriage. The lock clicked with such quiet finality. The unraveling happened with breathtaking speed. Within hours, Maya had contacted her lawyer. By evening, mutual friends were sending me disgusted messages. By the next morning, someone from HR wanted to discuss the company policy regarding workplace relationships. Olivia backed away immediately, suddenly concerned about her professional reputation. "This isn't what I signed up for," she said, blocking my number. I lost my job within a week. The divorce papers arrived 3 days later. My parents stopped taking my calls after Maya spoke with them. I watched helplessly as every aspect of my life collapsed. The foundations had been rotting beneath my feet all along, weakened by each lie, each betrayal, each moment of selfish indulgence. The speed of my social exile was stunning. People I'd known for years now crossed the street to avoid me. The narrative I'd carefully prepared about our troubled marriage, about my unhappiness, fell on deaf ears. No one wanted to hear my side. And why should they? The evidence was damning, the betrayal clear-cut. I tried staying with a friend, Mark, who reluctantly agreed to let me crash on his couch just for a night or two. On the second morning, I overheard him on the phone with Maya, apologizing for taking me in at all. He asked me to leave that afternoon, his loyalty clearly decided. The professional consequences were equally swift. Olivia and I worked in different departments, but the company's anti-fraternization policy was clear. Since she reported the relationship first, framing herself as the victim of my manipulation, I was the one who faced termination. The HR meeting wasn't even about hearing my side, it was simply to formalize what had already been decided. With no job, no home, and rapidly dwindling savings, I moved into this overpriced studio apartment, the only place I could find on short notice without references. The security deposit cleaned out nearly half my savings. The divorce would claim the rest and more. I tried contacting Olivia repeatedly, convinced that at least our connection had been real. Her final text was brutally clarifying. "I wanted the man who told me his marriage was already over, not the man who destroyed it while I watched. Please don't contact me again." Even my own parents took Maya's side. My mother's voice on the phone still haunts me. "We didn't raise you to be this person." They had always loved Maya, had welcomed her as a daughter. In their eyes, I hadn't just betrayed my wife, I'd betrayed the values they thought they'd instilled in me. Maya's lawyer was ruthlessly efficient. Given my infidelity, her case for an advantageous settlement was strong. I couldn't afford proper legal representation after losing my job, so I agreed to terms that heavily favored her. The house, most of our savings, even personal items that should have been clearly mine, all gone in exchange for a quicker, less publicly humiliating divorce. The isolation of the aftermath was its own special punishment. Without work or social obligations to structure my days, I had endless hours to replay every mistake, every self-deception, every moment I could have made a different choice. I found myself obsessively checking social media, watching Maya's life continue without me. She never posted anything directly about the divorce or my betrayal, she was too dignified for that. Instead, there were just photos of her with friends, traveling, enjoying life. Her visible healing was its own form of torture. 3 months after moving out, I drove by our old house out of some masochistic impulse. The garden I'd never made time to care for had been completely redone. The worn front door was freshly painted. She was erasing all physical traces of our shared life, replacing them with her own vision that had never included me. The most crushing moment came when I saw her profile picture change, a photo of her smiling with a man I didn't recognize. Not her new partner, as I initially feared in a surge of irrational jealousy, but her brother who had flown in to support her through the divorce. The comments below were telling, "So glad you're surrounded by people who deserve you. Onwards and upwards. Freedom looks good on you." I was not just the villain in my story now, I was the villain in everyone's story. The cautionary tale, the example of how not to be. One particularly low evening, drunk and self-pitying, I drafted a long email to Maya. Not asking for reconciliation, even I knew that was impossible, but seeking some kind of absolution. I detailed every regret, every moment of clarity, every realization about what I'd thrown away. I claimed to have changed, to have learned, to be suffering appropriately for my sins. In the cold light of morning, I recognized it for what it was, not an apology, but another attempt to center myself and my feelings. Another manipulation. I deleted the draft and accepted that some broken things can never be repaired. Now I sit in this barren apartment that costs too much for someone suddenly unemployed. The silence is deafening. No texts lighting up my phone, no social media accounts that anyone still follows, no friends willing to hear my side. Yesterday, I drove by our old house. Through the window, I could see Maya laughing with someone, moving on already while I remained trapped in the wreckage of my making. The hardest part isn't losing her. It's losing the person I thought I was, the good guy, the victim, the one who was just trying to find happiness. Now I see with brutal clarity I wasn't searching for happiness. I was running from accountability, from the hard work of real intimacy, from the person I was becoming. The weight of my choices sits heavy on my chest each night as I stare at the ceiling. No more elaborate justifications. No more carefully constructed victim narratives, just the cold reality of what I've done and everything I've lost. They say the truth sets you free. What they don't mention is that sometimes freedom looks a lot like an empty room and the knowledge that you've destroyed everything that ever mattered. 6 months into this new, diminished life, I've started therapy, not to win Maya back or to repair my reputation, but because I finally recognized the broken parts within myself that led to all this destruction. My therapist doesn't offer easy absolution or comforting platitudes. Instead, she asks the hard questions I avoided for years. When did I start believing I deserved more than I was willing to give? Why was betrayal easier than honest communication? What made me think I could find happiness by causing someone else pain? I have no good answers yet. Only the growing, uncomfortable awareness that the story I told myself about Maya's neglect, about my justified unhappiness, about deserving something more, was a convenient fiction. The truth is both simpler and harder to face. I made choices that prioritized momentary pleasure over lasting commitment. I chose the easy path of deception over the harder road of vulnerability and honest communication. Some days I fantasize about a future where redemption might be possible, not reconciliation with Maya, which I now understand is permanently beyond reach, but some version of a life where this massive failure doesn't define me completely. Other days, that seems like just another self-serving narrative, another way to avoid fully facing the consequences of my actions. The most honest moments come late at night when there's no one to perform for, no story to craft. In those quiet hours, I finally understand that the affair was never about Maya's failures or even about Olivia's allure. It was about my own hollowness, my inability to find fulfillment within myself or my commitments, my willingness to destroy rather than build. I keep the divorce papers in a drawer beside my bed, a tangible reminder of where self-deception leads. Sometimes I take them out and read through the clinical language that dissolved 8 years of promises, irreconcilable differences, breakdown of the marital relationship, infidelity as grounds for unequal distribution of assets. The legal terminology can't capture the human cost, the devastation left in the wake of my choices. Maya will heal, she already is healing. She has family, friends, integrity, and the knowledge that she wasn't the one who broke everything. I have this empty apartment, a growing stack of rejection letters from potential employers who have heard rumors, and the daily reckoning with the person I chose to become. They say rock bottom is where you finally stop digging. I've put down the shovel, but the climb out seems impossibly steep from here. The truth no one tells you about betrayal is that you don't just betray the other person. You betray yourself, every value you claim to hold, every promise you intended to keep, every version of yourself you aspired to be. That's the betrayal that follows you long after the relationship ends. That's the ghost that haunts these empty rooms. There's a particular silence that comes after you've burned everything down. Not peaceful, not cleansing, just empty, like standing in the charred remains of what used to be home, finally understanding what you've lost, and knowing with absolute certainty that it was entirely your choice to light the match.